Consultancy Growth Network. As you'll know, I'm a big believer in learning from people who've achieved the things that you want to. It's why I run this podcast, to share the stories of consulting leaders and how they've got to where they are today. So when I started talking to Mark Jansen and the team at Consultancy Growth Network, it was clear there was an obvious fit between Climate Consulting and their mission and what they are building with their network. But you're probably asking, what is the Consultancy Growth Network? The Consultancy Growth Network is the leading community of boutique consulting leaders. It brings together seasoned consulting growth experts who successfully scaled their own boutiques, with rapidly growing consulting founders looking to emulate their success. Now, you might be thinking, who are these growth experts? What do they actually know about consulting? And this is one of the most exciting things that personally I find about the network. The team at the Consultancy Growth Network have searched far and wide for some of the best boutique consulting leaders to help their members on their journeys, some of which I have previously interviewed for this podcast, such as Don Morehouse and Augusto Negrillo. But it's not just the insights from these people that you will benefit from. By joining, you get access to their jam-packed calendar of regular in-person and online events, their comprehensive growth hub of resources, and their active Slack community. Through all of these channels, you can learn, solve challenges, and achieve the goals you want for your firm. And now, if that wasn't enough reason to sign up, the Consultancy Growth Network is giving all listeners to this podcast a special sign-up offer. If you join for 12 months, you join for that next year, you will get your 13th month for free, giving you that extra month to continue to build on everything you're learning and continue to benefit from the network. To sign up, just visit consultancygrowthnetwork.com or contact their partnerships director, Luke at consultancygrowthnetwork.com. And when you're talking about joining, mention Create Engage or Climate Consulting, and you will get that special sign-up offer. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Climate Consulting. In this one, I am joined by someone who knows more about consultancy profitability than I think anybody else that I have ever met. And that is Peter Czapp, co-founder of the accountancy, the Wow Company, co-founder of the Consultancy Growth Network, and the brains behind the BenchPress, the industry's leading benchmarking report for the consulting sector. Peter and I have known each other for a little while now. We first met at last year's launch of the BenchPress through the Consultancy Growth Network. And it was off the back of a fantastic presentation that he gave there that we really got chatting. We spent ages talking all about the different levers for profitability and how consultancies can drive profitable growth, something that every consultancy that I know, and I'm sure that you listening to this, want to do. Since then, we have stayed in touch, talked a lot about how consultancies grow, how they can do that profitably. And it was those conversations that led to today's interview. Peter and his team have worked with hundreds of consultancies. And in this episode, he shares the 7 levers that they have identified that separate the best from the rest. This podcast, as you will know, is all about helping consultants to climb, helping consultants to achieve the best they can. And that is why I was super excited to have Peter on for this one. In this conversation, we go into detail on everything from pricing and positioning to the metrics that matter most if you are trying to drive the most profitable consultancy that you can have. Whether you are just launching your consultancy and you want to set things up on the right from the off, or maybe you are running a firm and seeing tons of top line growth, but you are not seeing that bottom line catch up. This episode is packed full of insights that you are going to be able to apply straight away to help you change that position. So with that intro over, I would definitely say to grab a notepad for this one. There is so many things that you will want to write down. Get in a nice quiet room, grab that notepad, and enjoy today's conversation with Peter Czapp. Peter, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on. I'm very excited to talk all about finance, and what a place to do it as well. My first ever guest with a professional studio.
I love to hear that you're excited about talking about finance. One of the few people that would be.
Or, Peter, anything that makes more profit, as we're going to learn about.
Yeah, exactly that.
So obviously we know each other well. For our listeners and today our viewers, it would be great if you could give an overview of who you are and how you got to where you are today, just so they know why they should be listening to you about what we're about to talk about.
So I've been immersed in the consulting world for 21 years. It all started back in 2004 when I set up the WOW company, co-founded the WOW company. And that's grown to become an accountancy practice that specializes in working with consultancies. So we've got a team of 60. We work with hundreds of consultancies around the country, tends to be the independent ones. And along that journey, across the 21 years, there's been lots of things we've done along the way to support that work. So we started benchmarking in 2012. And every year we survey consultancies to understand what the top performing ones are doing differently. We publish benchmarks and we publish really interesting insights. And as well as that, we wanted to set up a community to bring consultancies together so they could learn and grow and share experiences with each other. And we do that through TCGN, so the Consultancy Growth Network, which I co-founded in 2019. So yeah, a lot of work around consultancies. I've always been fascinated about the difference between those that tick along and the top performing ones. And I'm going to talk about that today.
Amazing. Well, I'm really looking forward to that because obviously we met through TCGN, and I think it was actually last year's BenchPress where we kind of really got talking. And I'm conscious, timing wise, we are recording just before the next one. Just because I think it sets the scene, you touched on it. Could you just give a little bit on what that BenchPress is? Because again, if people haven't heard of it, it's fantastic in terms of insight, but what actually do people get from that?
Yeah, so I'll talk you through the process a little bit. So we survey in the spring, and we gather data from around about 300 independent consultancies. And we ask them all sorts of really interesting questions. Now, that gives us benchmarks, but it also gives us an opportunity to look at what the top performing ones are doing differently and share those insights. So what happens every year in the summertime, in this case, July, a 50-odd page report will land on people's desks. And there's a race to kind of go through that and pick out the key insights. And that's part of my job really, is to help curate that story and help point consultancies in the right direction so they can take positive action. Because data is one thing, but it's the action I'm really interested in. What are you going to do about this? And one of the benefits of BenchPress is it shows you what's possible. And I know a lot of people have looked at that report and gone, oh my goodness, I'm in the bottom quartile for this. I don't want to be in the bottom quartile next year. I'm going to push on, and it encourages them to do that.
I love it. And I think to your action point, that is what today is going to be all about, because as you know, and many of my listeners know, often we talk wide ranging career advice, growth advice. Today, we are going super deep to what I said at the start on finance and particularly on profit. And linking to that BenchPress, because I think that's a really nice starting point. It was something I took from that. And I know as a benchmark, a lot of people talk about profitability and the right level of profit. I've heard plenty of people talk about, well, you should hit 50% gross margin, you should hit 20% net margin. You're not only getting these consultancies to fill out the BenchPress, you're actually doing their accounts. So you get to see behind the curtain. Firstly, are those the right benchmarks? Have I made them up? And secondly, actually, how many firms are hitting those? So our listeners, to your point, know if they're top, middle, or bottom quartile.
So first up, they are absolutely the right benchmarks to aim for. So just to repeat, so 50% gross margin, 20% operating profit. But they are not benchmarks to aspire to achieve. They are, if you like, the minimum standard. I was part of an M&A panel, and I was asked a question earlier on this year about whether they were really necessary. If you got to just shy of those, was that okay? My answer, and the answer for across all the panel members, was no, it's not okay. That is the threshold, the entry point that we should be starting with. And unfortunately, not enough consultancies are hitting those numbers. So I can tell you that 37% are hitting that 50% gross margin figure, and 39% are hitting that 20% figure. So less than 50% in both cases are hitting those margins. We can all be doing better.
Wow. So it's fascinating just to touch on that. Those are the minimum. I don't know if you have this stat, Tam. What's the top quartile? What are you seeing the best people are doing?
So if you've got a gross margin of 61% plus, if you have an operating profit of 30% plus, and you notice both of those numbers have shifted by 10%, because very simply, everything flows from gross margin. Get your gross margin right, you will get a really solid operating profit figure. So that's what top performing looks like. And less than 20% are hitting those numbers year after year. but that's what top performing looks like. And when it comes to the valuation of your business, when it comes to M&A advisors guiding you and people looking at what your business is worth, those are the numbers they will look at first.
Wow. Well, and this is going to be what we talk about today in terms of how you actually achieve those. Because if I'm thinking of the listener, they know what they're paying salary wise, and everyone's paying roughly the same. They know what they're charging fee wise, and this is where you might correct me. Everyone's charging roughly the same. So the magic comes in, how do you go from, to your point, below 50 and 20 to 60 and 30 feels like a massive jump. That's 25% increase in gross margin. This is probably where I'd love to get you to introduce the 7 levers that you've developed, because I know this is something that really caught my attention when we first spoke, that there are ways you fix this. So do you want to just introduce what those 7 ways that people can actually increase their profit are? And then let's go really deep, because this is one where I want our listeners to have their notebooks out to make these shifts.
So the way I developed those 7 levers was from an awful lot of research. It started with our own clients at the WOW company. We do the accounts for hundreds of consultancies, and we're able to see, well, quite frankly, everything that goes on, and able to identify the top performing ones profit-wise. We also have a lot of data from BenchPress. So again, hundreds of consultancies complete that every year. And in both cases, we're able to look at the top performers, and we interviewed them. We had lots of conversations and we looked for commonalities. And that's where these 7 levers came from. And quite simply, if you do these things, you will be more profitable. I absolutely guarantee it. It's a tried and tested formula that I've seen consistently year after year after year. I've been doing this for over 2 decades now, and the same things keep cropping up.
That was a great teaser. What are those 7? And we're going to talk about all of them today. I don't mind whether you want to go least important to most, most to least, or you might tell me that all 7 are as important as each other.
Now, this is a real test. Can I remember them all off by heart? Do you know what? I'm going to start with, let's start with the first one. I'm going to tease people a little bit. I'm not going to
I like that.
All up
if
front.
only this was live as well, we could get them to text in to tell us which one they wanted next. I love that.
They could guess maybe. And actually, here's the thing. You probably could guess a lot of these. They're intuitive. But the first one you might not be able to guess, because it's all about positioning, because that is the foundations for profitability further down the line. And what we discovered in our research was that, well, first of all, we asked a really interesting question in BenchPress. We asked consultancies how differentiated their proposition is. And there were 4 answers, 4 possible answers, from not very different, quite different, a little different, and very different. And 17% were in that top box, said they were very different. Their proposition was very different. And I was really interested to see the performance of that 17%. And what we discovered was that group were twice as likely to be fast growing, which is really interesting. So fast growing, we define as growing by more than 26% revenue year after year. And they were also twice as likely to be highly profitable, that 61% gross margin figure. So everything came down to positioning as a foundation for what came next. If you get your positioning right, everything else is a lot easier. It's not guaranteed, but it's easier. If your positioning is wrong and you're not differentiated, you're positioning yourself as experts, then it's a lot harder to hit those numbers further down the line.
Well, why don't we start there also, because obviously positioning is within my sphere of marketing. And I think it's fascinating because, as we know, marketing has a mixed view in consulting. Some people really see the value, some don't. And so it's fascinating hearing you say that actually, the first lever you drew to was positioning, and that how people see you in the market. And maybe we start, why is that? And how, I guess for our listeners who are thinking, well, if I position, I niche, I'm going to lose money, I'm going to lose business. Why do you see it as different? Why does the data say it's different?
So positioning has always been important, but it's particularly important right now, because right now people are not looking for generalists. They're looking for experts. They're looking for someone very specific to solve a very specific problem. And the better that consultancies can be at articulating exactly what they do, the very specific challenges they solve, and exactly who they are best to do it for, the more successful that they will be. Now, there's a challenge with that in our heads, I think, because as you narrow your focus, what goes on in our heads often is that we think we are narrowing our opportunities. Actually, what we're doing is opening up a whole world of opportunities. That the narrower you can get in terms of what you do and who you do it for, you will find yourself, it's a lot easier to be focused, to figure out who you're going to target, the messages you're going to send them. And when it comes to those messages, it's really, really important that you're doing things like demonstrating your return on investment, showcasing your expertise. Have a think about your website right now. In fact, have a think about all of your communications, all the events that you run, all of the thought leadership pieces you put out. Is every single thing that you are doing positioning yourself as an expert for the specific challenge that you solve, for the specific group of people? And are you showcasing the value that you can add and demonstrating your return on investment? And if the answer is, well, we're not really, then there's work to do. And I would suggest for everyone listening to this, there is work to do, because there is always the next level. And I just encourage you to think about what the next level is for you. How could you narrow your focus, be clearer in your positioning, and open up a world of opportunities?
I fully agree, Peter. You're preaching to the choir here. For our audience, and to your point, thinking of firms I've met in the Consultancy Growth Network, the network TCGN, obviously we'll use interchangeably. When we talk about positioning and niche, what level of niche, if you like, do people need to think about that then has a direct impact on pricing? What I'm thinking about, to give you an example, is I know firms who are niche by industry. We might be the only pharma consultancy. They're niche by offering. We do this type of specific consulting. I've also met some where they position themselves, well, we do change and we have smarter people than other people. Is there a hierarchy in those? Is that all positioning that directly links into profitability, or is there a specific, is it vertical, horizontal, or something else that really drives that, I assume, ability to charge more?
It's both of those things. It's market and it's offering. And I'll give you an example. I talked earlier about how there's always the next level. I'm going to give you a case study now from one of our clients. So they were a marketing consultancy, and they started off, as a lot of consultancies do, just doing marketing for anyone, and because they needed to pay the bills. But they realized pretty quickly that that wasn't any sort of differentiation at all. So they started focusing on communications, and they started focusing on larger businesses. So they were doing comms for larger businesses. That then eventually became internal comms for businesses with more than 5,000 staff. And eventually internal comms became benefit comms. So they focused on employee benefits and all the specific communications around that. And they started to do that in highly regulated industries. So now they've got a very specific offering, employee benefit comms, for highly regulated industries. There was a next level even beyond that, because they went and focused entirely on pensions communications, and they did it just for financial services. So if you look at that example, they went from doing marketing for everyone to just doing pensions communications for the financial services industry. And by doing that, they created a situation where they had no competition, literally no competition. If anyone's read the book Blue Ocean Strategy, it talks about moving to a place where no competition exists. Well, one of the easiest ways to do that is find a place where you're the only person doing a thing. So when financial services companies had a decision to make around who was going to help with their pensions communications, they had a choice. Do we work with the world's leading expert who will charge more, who will absolutely charge more, but have got this incredible track record? Or do we take a risk and go to someone else who isn't as specialized, doesn't have the expertise? Well, what tended to happen, those highly regulated industries, those financial services companies, they didn't want to take the risk of going to someone less good than the number one out there. So they went to the number one, they paid the price, and this business was hugely, hugely profitable.
Wow. I think it's a great case study and raises an interesting question, again, for our listeners and our viewers. It feels like that takes quite a bit of confidence. And I wonder, in that example or others you've spoken to, the advice you'd give to people running these businesses on how to go on that journey. Because I've heard people say, well, I don't want a niche, or I don't want to carve out this place for myself, because then we'll have to say no to other business and the market's too small. How do you advise your clients, or recommend for our listeners, that they start down that journey?
So what you'll notice in that example is that it was gradual. They didn't go from doing marketing for anyone straight to doing pensions communications. It was a gradual process, and it was also based on demand and also their skill set. They had particular skills in-house that they harnessed. They noticed opportunities where they could create a situation where there would be no competition and the work was highly profitable and it was regular. So there were decisions along that journey, and you don't need to make all of those decisions now. What you do need to do is take the next step. So for everyone listening to this and thinking about your own example and your own potential journey to go on, what is that next step? Now, in making that step, You don't need to say no to other work. What I am suggesting is that you really strongly articulate your positioning through all of your communications, but it doesn't stop you accepting work that comes outside of that. And what you'll notice over time is, as you get narrower and narrower, you will choose not to accept the other stuff because it's just harder. The more focused you get, the better you get at delivering it, the more profitable that delivery becomes. You just get really, really good at doing the same thing again and again. And so for anyone listening to this, it's not about necessarily the end game. It's just the next step. And what is that next step for you? How can you narrow that offering? And in doing so, get more focused. I have another example for you. Someone who was fearful of this. In fact, by the way, if I lined up 100 people who've got really good at niching, every single one of them, 100 out of 100 would say, I wish I'd done it sooner. And by the way, this applies in my own case. We took 8 years at WOW to really hone in on consultancies and creative businesses. And my goodness, I wish I'd done it sooner. So the example I have for you is a consultancy that worked with hedge funds eventually. They did HR consultancy for hedge funds. And what I loved about the conversation where they ended up was I was chatting to the partner there and he said, look, all of my clients are in like a 1 square mile radius of London. They're in just one little place and there's only 100 or so of them. And I just need to go around that 1 square mile and have lots of lunches and dinners with those 100. And there we go. I've got an entire business for the rest of my life. So that was really interesting perspective. That focus gave him clarity of targeting when it came to their marketing.
I love that example. And leads on to one question that I have around, and I like to get practical and really detailed with these people, you'll find is, if I'm listening to, I buy in, how do I pick my niche? I've got loads of clients at the moment. What's the action I could take to guide me on that next step? Is it look at my finances, speak to my team? What's the thing that you would recommend to unlock what that next level of niche is?
So there's a number of factors. So I guess expertise and track record is an obvious one. If you suddenly find yourself gravitating towards a particular group of clients or doing a particular thing, those are the obvious places to look. But I think you need to think long-term. We all need to think long-term with this. Is this an industry that we want to be in longer term? Is it an industry where we can be the number one? Absolutely be the number one. Or if you look around, you think, my goodness, there are some very, very good players, well-established players in here. And so you might choose a place where far less competition exists. Profitability really comes into it. I'd encourage everyone looking at this. It's not just, well, we happen to work with these people, happen to do this thing a lot. Well, that thing that you happen to do a lot, is it profitable? And when you look at all the work that you do, all the sectors that you work in, all of the various offerings that you have, which are the ones that you are making the most money and which are the ones you're making the least money? Once you understand that, you can do more of this at the top and less of this at the bottom. And that will definitely feed into your decision-making process. So it's a number of factors. It's your skills and expertise and experience. It's the potential to be number one in an industry. And it's also the profitability that you can make longer term. Those are the things to think about.
There feels like quite a lot of intent, and this feels very intentional. And I know this is one of the other levers. So I'll tease one for our listeners and you can tell me where it comes. But how does that tie in with being intentional? Because niching is very intentional. In terms of the impact that has on profitability, is it just about committing to niche, or are there other things that those best businesses do intentionally that really drive that profitability and help them get towards those magic 61 and 30%?
So I love the word intent. It's much underused in business, I think. And I was asked a question, sort of a general question really, around what sets the ones that tick along apart from the ones that achieve great things. And by say achieving great things, I'm talking about consistent year after year profitable growth, not one-offs and then, flashes in the pan. It's consistent year after year profitable growth. And it is that intent. It is doing the thinking, creating the plan, being disciplined and focused and intentional around the execution of that plan, consistently focusing on the stuff that makes the biggest difference. And that's all kind of obvious, but really hard to do consistently year after year. People fall by the wayside. Now, when it comes to being intentional around profit, this starts with thinking about the sort of clients that you want to work with and the sort of work that you want to do with them. Having a clear plan for that. It then feeds through into how you price and how you quote for work. and intentionally quoting for work that you know is going to be profitable. And again, that sounds really obvious, but we spoke to one client recently and we noticed that some of their work was highly profitable, that's 60% plus on projects gross margin, and some was really not profitable at all, around about the 30% mark. And we were really curious to understand what's going on. And we just noticed they was completely unintentional in their quoting process. They were allowing quotes to go out at 30, 40% just to win the work, just to bring the revenue in. And the suggestion we made, which they adopted, was really simple, but transformational. We just said, don't send out quotes for less than 50% gross margin. So they didn't. So now every single quote was for above 50%. And there were a couple of exceptions. You had to get partner sign off if you breached or went below that threshold. And you'd have to have an incredibly good reason, like you were trying to get a new logo in a particular sector, or this would be a fantastic case study for future work. But you had to get partner sign off. But this all came from just being intentional with the quotes you were sending out, the clients you were working on, the projects that you were engaging with, rather than just doing anything.
I think that's a great example also to dig into around intent and sticking to the process, because as we sit here in the podcast studio, we can say, and our listeners can hear, well, don't send anything out under 50%. Obviously, we've had a challenging year the last year just gone, and touching wood, that's improving. Also, as consultants, we're very good at rationalizing decisions. So you mentioned there, win a new logo, get a good case study. In and of themselves, those can be great decisions. They can also be justifications for bad decisions. How can our listeners challenge themselves if they are the partner who's signing this off or doing the quoting? How can they challenge themselves to say, well, this is the logo, I should take the 40% margin, versus I'm just going to take 40% margin on everything and say it's for a new logo?
I think you know that deep down. I think deep down you know it. And it's all about standards, and you get what you accept in life and in business. And if you just consistently accept lower margin quoting, then you're going to have to deal with that on the bottom line. So I think deep down we know whether this is something that we're doing because it will have a transformational effect on our future growth, or if it's something just to get some revenue in through the door at a lower rate. And as long as you're being honest with yourself about that, and that's the beauty about having the sign-off process, it brings some objectivity and you can challenge some of those thought processes, or maybe even make a group decision on this so that it's not just one person that is constantly signing these off. But I think deep down we know what we're doing here. And the key is to have a plan, right? Because the alternative is to not have a plan. You pick up any clients doing any sorts of projects on any sorts of margin, and guess what? You're going to get any sort of profit. So have a plan, stick to it. It comes back to what I talked about earlier. It's about being disciplined and focused. And to do that consistently is hard work, but that is the difference between having a mediocre year profitability-wise and a top-performing year.
So that all sounds like where every consultancy wants to get to, Peter. And you mentioned, I love that point you made around what you get is what you accept. And I guess just like going to the gym, if you go a certain number of times a week, you do the certain routine, you'll get the results. What's the equivalent here? If someone listening wants to have that better profitability, you mentioned having a plan, you mentioned getting sign-offs. I assume there's a whole structure that can underpin that. What do you recommend to your clients, and what have you seen work for firms there?
So there's some detailed bits which we'll come on to later, things like reporting and how you manage resource. But I want to just go up a little bit when it comes to thinking about our offerings and thinking about how we deliver those. Because if we are doing different things all of the time, then we have to reinvent the wheel each time. There's a lot of effort and energy that goes into doing something different each time. And that's quite fun and creatively stimulating and intellectually challenging, but it's not super profitable. What is super profitable is doing the same thing over and over again and getting better and better and better at it, adding more value, and ideally creating methodologies. So in terms of really good habits that we can all get into, it's to find out what we're really good at, find out where we can add the most value to our clients, and then do that repeatedly and create methodologies and make sure everyone follows them, because then you're not reinventing the wheel. And actually what you can do over time as you build those methodologies, you don't need to hire geniuses, expensive geniuses. You can hire low-level people that will cost you less, that are still delivering huge value by using your IP, using your methodologies and doing it again and again and again, and getting better and more efficient at it, and therefore more profitable. So that's a really good habit to get into. Have a look around your business and, well, first of all, let's go to the places where you are reinventing the wheel and maybe stop doing that. And then look at the places where there is an opportunity to create methodologies and then come up with a trading plan to execute it.
I think it's a great point. And like you say, links, I suspect, to the positioning as well, because if you have a positioning with a market, you can make a methodology. It's really interesting you mentioned there around hiring more junior people, so lowering the cost of delivery. Have you ever had consultants who come to you and say, well, our skill is in that we're highly skilled consultants, we're the experts in this? Because I've met a number of consultancies where they see junior resource almost as a negative. And I don't know if you've had that, and if so, how you've helped someone kind of bridge that mindset shift.
Yeah, that happens a lot, right? Because we love to showcase our expertise and our intelligence as consultants, and we can still do that. But the way we're doing that is through our methodology. We're saying that collectively as a firm, we have worked out the absolute best way to solve this particular challenge for you. And then it doesn't really matter who the people are, to an extent. I acknowledge that. So I think it depends on what you want to do. And if you're willing to let go of the ego, if you're willing to build a business that isn't reliant on certain individuals, which I think is a hugely smart thing, by the way, certainly will make it more saleable in the future, then this is the way to go. However, if it's your name above the door and you want to be the hero, then this might not be the path ahead, but you will have to accept that you're going to be tied to this business for a little while, and it might prevent you from doing certain things, and it might not give you the consistent profitability that you're looking for further down the line.
If you are enjoying this episode so far, I have one small ask. I would massively appreciate if you could open your phone right now, hit share, and send this to someone in your network, one of your friends, one of your colleagues, one of your clients who you think would benefit from this interview. This podcast only runs because of you and because of the value you get from it. And it means so much to me to broaden that reach so we can help more consultants to climb in consulting. So please hit that share, send it to a friend, and I'm really excited to hear what they think too. I think some great advice, and I suspect later when we touch on resourcing and actually how you structure those teams, I'd love to get more of your thoughts on how you balance the people delivering to, I guess, take the top bit of the gross profit, because we've touched on a lot of the number of gross profit, but there's that 40% that gets you to the 60 that actually will be fascinating. I think before we go there though, something we've alluded to and we touched on a bit with positioning, but it's actually pricing, because all of the things we've touched on so far, as I understand it, are to enable you to charge the fees you need to hit those margins. What do you see from consultancies and pricing? Are many of them being intentional? Are many of them pushing those prices up? What are you seeing from those firms that are reporting in the BenchPress?
So one of the really interesting bits of data we publish every year in BenchPress are day rates. And the really interesting thing about day rates is that only 30% of consultancies are actually increasing them every single year. Now, I find that shocking because costs are going up every single year. And in the last few years, costs have been increasing significantly year on year. So if costs are going up and we're not increasing our day rates, then we're just going to get squeezed. Our margins will get squeezed. So the first thing that we can do, given that day rates are often the cornerstone of pricing for consultancies, is make sure that every single year we're reviewing our rates and we're increasing them, at least in line with inflation, because our teams are coming to us asking for at least inflationary pay increases. So we need to make sure our prices keep pace. However, when we're reviewing our pricing, it might not just be a simple case of increasing day rates. In fact, the top performing firms think in a far more smart way than just randomly increasing day rates. So the first thing I'd encourage everyone to do is to think about all of the offerings that you have, because out of all of them, there will be at least one or two that you'll be able to charge disproportionately for, that you will be able to increase your rates significantly without them impacting demand. So just have a think about all the services that you offer and which ones could you increase the price on, and clients wouldn't really react because you're just adding so much value. Now, those are the areas that you can focus on and increase profitability, because what we're now doing is moving away from day rates and pricing more based on the value that we add. And that's the holy grail, right? Is actually we move away from day rates completely and we price based on the value that we add. Now, to do that successfully, a lot of work is required. We need to go really deeply and really understand what our clients want, what impact the work will have on their business, almost build the case study before you actually pick up the client. So you're trying to figure out, well, what will the return on this investment be? Almost think about it in terms of a PR headline. What would the headline for this piece of work be after the event? And if you can understand the impact that you're going to have for that client and you're able to put a value on it, then you can charge not based on day rates, but based on that value and earn those premium pricing and that premium profitability as well.
So I think that point around pricing for value is fascinating, and would be interested if there's any firms that you know have done that well. And also, and maybe this is a before or after question, how they've proven the ROI afterwards. Because a lot of consultancies, ultimately the challenge is proving ROI to have that case study. So I'd love if there is an example where someone's been able to do both sides of that coin that you've worked with to bring that to life.
Yeah, it might be the case that you need to be smart in your pricing and actually build in some sort of reward pricing structure. So for example, we had a client at WOW who, the service they provided was they would go into telecoms companies and help improve their customer retention. So when it came to contract renewal, they would improve their customer retention. And so telecoms companies knew that this was around about this sort of level. And so they were be able to work out, well, if we can improve it by this percentage, what will that actually mean in terms of lifetime value, contract retention, telling their friends, etc. So they're able to put a price on it. And that's what we're trying to do, is put a value on an uplift of 1 or 2% on these percentages. Now, what they did was quite clever. There was a £200,000 bit of work and they put half of that at risk. So they said, we're going to do this at cost. So 50% GP, we're going to do it for 100,000, but we're going to be rewarded based on the results that we get. So the better performance that we get in terms of retention, the more we will get paid. And what they ended up getting paid was, instead of 200,000, they actually got paid £550,000 because they were able to demonstrate the results. Now, to do that, you need to clearly be able to measure the uptick in performance and have a monitoring system in place and robust contracts to ensure that you get paid. They took a risk, right? Because they could have only got paid, if things didn't improve, they could have only got paid 100,000. So just covering costs. But they took a risk, and when the client won, they won. So that is the purest way of pricing based on value. Of course, there are other ways of doing it, saying, well, look, we're going to charge you, we think we're going to get this, and therefore we're going to charge you this. But actually, I think it gets really interesting when you can build in some, not just value pricing, but reward pricing into your model, and you can both share in the results. And it gets everyone focused on what really matters here. Because what really matters is getting results for the client. Always has done, always will. You can build that into your thinking, your pricing, your methodologies. That's where it gets really interesting.
I love that example, Peter, because like you say, everyone's aligned to the same thing. And actually that great point of, if you can find a metric that you can both focus on, you're driving to a result and you can both look at it and say, has it improved because of our work? To your point, have we delivered value? Because ultimately that's what consulting firms should do. If they're not delivering value, should you be paid any fees? So I think that's a really great example. And there's an interesting question around confidence in this, because you say people should raise their fees, to your point of inflation. If you're not, well, where is that cost going? Do you ever have firms who say, we'd love to, but again, take the last year, the market's not quite there, or we're nervous a client might leave us? How do you recommend people approach that fee increase conversation? Because that often, I think, could be the bigger blocker rather than just the numbers side.
I have a beautiful phrase for you that will help you,
please,
in this task. So when you're going to existing clients especially, don't forget your prospects have no idea what you charged previously. So that is a great opportunity for you to consistently increase prices almost month by month. I had one consultancy firm that played a game that said, look, how high can we go for the next prospect proposal that we issue? And they just kept pushing it and pushing it. And actually, by pushing your pricing with prospects, you will create a really big gap between what you're charging for new clients and maybe some of your existing ones. And that will encourage you to have the conversation with those existing clients. Now, when you're having the conversation, I've got a magic phrase for you. So rather than saying, look, we're going to increase prices, say, look, you're currently paying this. If you're a new client now, you'd be coming on at this level. How do you feel about closing that gap? So the crucial bit of that phrase is, how do you feel? You're not saying we're definitely going to do this. We're not forcing it upon you. You're simply asking the question, how would you feel about closing that gap? So the likely answers, you get a range of responses from, been waiting for this. Of course, increase it to the new rates. You guys are wonderful. To, look, if you increase it by a penny, then we're going to have to go out to tender on this. You're going to have to go and speak to procurement. And a range in between. Well, how about we meet halfway? Or how about we phase it up over a period of time? But at least then you have a choice. And for example, to take the one extreme option, we'll have to put that out to tender. You get to decide whether or not you go through that process. You could say, well, look, let's leave it for 6 months and review this in 6 months, depending on how you're getting on. But the bigger gap you can create between your new clients and that you're charging and your existing ones, the greater the incentive is to just walk away from some of those existing clients. So keep pushing the pricing for new clients and then have that conversation with existing clients. You'd be amazed at what happens. I've lost track of the number of emails I've got. They're just gone, oh my God, I had this conversation at work, like magic. I've been putting this off for months. And then I have the conversation, the client says, yeah, it's fine. Why didn't I do it sooner? So do it now, right now.
Well, and I love that example also because, to your point, Peter, it gives you as the business owner the ability to backtrack or to just take a step before you, or take a thought before you action. Because, and maybe I'll ask this we'll do it as a bit of a role play. If I come to you or you came to me and go, how would you feel? And I went, I feel terrible, Peter, we're not doing that. Is that then, I'm inferring correctly, that's your opportunity as the consultancy to say, well, do we want to keep this work?
Yeah, but also it's an opportunity to have a conversation. So why is that? Is that because we're not delivering the value that you want? Is that because there's simply no more budget for the work? But it opens a conversation around where you're adding value, where you're not, what's working well in the relationship and where it's not. And, this is basic account management, right? But interestingly, less than a third of consultants actually have regular reviews with clients. And again, that blows my mind. When we discovered that stat with BenchPress, less than a third of consultants actually have regular reviews with clients. So have those regular reviews, really understand where you're adding value and where you're not, what's working and what isn't. And then when you have those pricing conversations, you've already teed up the fact that you're doing great work and everything's going well, you're adding value. And so actually those pricing conversations are a lot easier. If you're going in cold after having not really spoken to them for a year about how things going, that's going to be a little bit more tentative. Ooh, how are things? Are things going all right? Keeping your fingers crossed. Don't keep your fingers crossed. No. And then those conversations will be a lot easier.
Yeah, I think the account review thing's a great point. Like you say, if you're going to raise the price, you should probably know how someone's feeling. And then I love, as you gave in that example, that point around opening a conversation. Because if I'm a client of yours and actually it's okay, but it's not great, you haven't lost anything. We can have that discussion and make it better. Whereas to your point, I suspect if you came in and went, well, we're raising fees, that's your reminder to get rid of us, which is a very different, or our reminder to get rid of you, which is a very different starting point, isn't it?
Well, I love those opportunities to chat to clients about how we could do things better. So we've got hundreds, I think between 400 and 500 clients at WOW. And for the vast majority of those, we're absolutely brilliant. But every now and again, we do something that doesn't go to plan. And those are the conversations that allow us to get better. And we absolutely love them. We survey our clients using NPS surveys every quarter. So every 3 months, clients get an opportunity to tell us what they love and what they don't love. And because we can't help ourselves, I mean, we always go to the negative stuff, but that's where the gold is. Those are the opportunities for us to improve and get better and ensure that we get even better scores next time. But I love those conversations, and I encourage everyone to go seeking them out.
I love that. And on the pricing side, I love that example you gave of the firm who they've got a game of just continuing to increase. For people listening, what's your view on pricing, I guess, as a lever to get things over the line? So if I've got a tricky client or procurement and they say, well, can you give us a discount and we will reduce, we'll get you in. If you can give us 10% off, some call it negotiation, but where do you sit on discounting? Is it a great way to get your foot in the door? Is it something people should never do? Kind of what's your perspective on it?
I think it's the reality of consulting life. Most consultants discount and 61% will give away a discount of 6% or more. Now, I think that's huge because that 6% comes straight off the bottom line. So if you are going to discount, I think it's important to have a proper discounting strategy, to really think about that carefully, because procurement departments are a way of life. But I think there's a wonderful game we can play. One of the best examples is a client of ours who figured out that with their clients, the procurement departments were looking for the wins, right? And looking to own those wins and say, look, we've got this. So what they would do is they would have a ratchet model, very simply, and say to the procurement department, right, the more you spend with us, the more discount we will give you. But we will give you that discount, not in money off, but in extra days. So straight away, they were reducing their exposure, because if you're giving away a day, it costs you less than actually reducing the price. So they were giving bonus days to the procurement department to say, these are yours. You can use them in any department that you see fit, but that's how they did that. But it was based on a ratchet model. You've got to spend more with us. Now, I love the whole give to get strategy. There's loads of things that you can get in return for a discount. Things like improved payment terms, longevity of contracts, introductions to other parts of the business, case studies. There's a raft of things that you can get in return for any discount that you have to give. But I'd encourage you to think about what you give away, because it might seem like 1 or 2%, or in the case I said earlier, 6%. It seems like a low number, a single digit number, but that is absolutely huge. So maybe look at reducing your increments to 0.5% or 1%, just to really narrow down what you do give away and always get something in return.
I think it's a great point. And it would be good just to go deep there, because like you say, it can seem easy. I'll give away 1%. That's nothing. Why is that such a significant discount when you get to bottom line? And your example of giving days versus straight cash discount, why is that better?
Well, quite simply, if you reduce something by £1,000, that £1,000 comes straight off the bottom line. If you give someone £1,000 worth of hours, that's only costing you 50% of that because of the margin, assuming your margins are 50%. So it will cost you half the amount.
Wow. So actually that's quite, while it feels like the same amount, and to your point, to the procurement or to your client could feel the same, actually for you as a consultancy, that's quite significant.
Yeah, half.
That's, well, and I'm trying to do the maths, and you probably will know them quicker than me, Peter. I remember you talking about, from the positive, the stat of you increase prices 10%, it increases profit 50%. And so actually, if you're reducing price by 6%, that's going to have an even more drastic decrease in the other way as well, to your point. And this is where your maths as the accountant will be better than mine. Actually, that £1,000 off, if you only make £2,000 net margin, you're actually giving away half your profit, if not more in some cases.
Exactly. And what will put you in a really strong position with this is, going back to the first point we talked about, is positioning, is if you know you're in a place where no competition exists, where they cannot get this anywhere else, then you can go into those conversations with real confidence. But if you're going into this knowing that actually they could get this from half a dozen other people at possibly a reduced price, and you're arguing over nuances about whether or not you could do it a little bit better than the other folks down the road, that's a really tricky situation to be in. So you can see the power of positioning trickling down through every single facet of consulting life, including your confidence when it comes to batting away those discounting questions.
I love that. And obviously running a marketing agency for consulting, completely agree, Peter. And linking to that then, and we've talked a bit about the kind of psychology of pricing. Where do you fall on how to present a price? Because a client will often say, well, I've got this project, tell me how much it's going to cost me. What is best for consultancies in terms of converting that higher price? Should I just give you one, here's our cost for the whole thing? Do I give options? What do you see working best with your clients?
So we have some data on this, some very, very clear data. And that data came from a book that I read. So it's Pricing Creativity by Blair Enns. And it's a book that I'd encourage everyone to read if you've not read it, because that had a transformational effect on so many of our clients' pricing strategies. One of the things that Blair talks about in his book is really simple concept. It says, instead of presenting one price, present 3 pricing options. So I was really curious to see what would happen to the results of consulting firms that did this. So I asked the question, I said, how many pricing options do you give? And I looked at that top group, the one that gave 3 pricing options. And what I noticed was 2 really interesting things. So first of all, they were 50% more likely to have a high client value, so a year one value of over £100,000. And they were twice as likely to have a high conversion rate, so a conversion rate of 60% or more, conversion rate from proposal through to client. So they were significantly more likely to have larger clients, significantly more likely to convert from proposal to client. And this backs up what Blair talks about in his book. Now I had the evidence based on 300 respondents. I talk about this often, and I'd encourage everyone to put together 3 pricing options. Because if you only give one, then that person, we like to compare as humans. That's how we figure out whether something is good value or not. And if you're only putting one pricing option, then in order to get that comparison, they'll be forced to go and find another competitor to price that against. Now, they might still do that anyway, but I can assure you that putting together 3 pricing options will increase your conversion rate, and it will increase the average value of your clients. I remember one consultancy came to us, a very simple example. So I told him about this concept, and he had a piece of discovery work, really small piece of discovery work, £15,000. And that was his entry into clients. And I told him at the start of one summer, and he just kept sending me text messages all summer with the new figure that he'd sold this £15,000 piece of consulting for. So I get a text message saying, I've just sold it for 20, and then 25, and then 30. And then it got bigger and bigger. And by the end of the summer, so pretty much a 2-month period, he'd gone from selling from £15,000 to £60,000 as an average. And I loved getting those text messages. It's the only thing that beeps on my phone is text. I've got no notifications. But every time I get a text, I knew it'd be from Martin, and I'd go, oh, he's just sold it for that. And that all came from giving the 3 pricing options and positioning. It helped position that initial piece of work differently in people's eyes.
So obviously anyone listening wants to know how you go from 15 to 60. And I think it gives us a great example to actually dig into as much as you can, Peter, so stop me if you can't, of actually how you as a consultancy do that. Because as a marketing agency, I know how we do have different pricing options. I'm sure for you and Wow, you have different pricing options. It's not as common in consulting to have gold, silver, bronze, or whatever you call it. In this case, what did Martin do to turn discovery into 3 options? And then how did he push that price so quickly up to that 60?
So he took that discovery option. Well, the first thing you do is anchor high. And so for anyone listening to this, I want you to think about what would the most amazing version of your offering look like? If you really went to town and literally money was no object from that client, what would it look like? And this is such a great exercise to do with your teams. Like, what would you add to your service that would make it 7-star? Then work back from that, and that becomes your top offering. You always anchor with that first. Then your next option is the one, in Martin's case, this was the £15,000 option. And what you're doing is you're stripping out some of the things from the top option, but not too many, actually. And you're left with what looks like a really attractive option, but it's significantly less expensive. Then from that core offering, you just strip out again some more stuff, and you're left with a basic offering. And in Martin's case, positioning that, what was £15,000 piece of consultancy in the middle, from a price point of view, it was quite far away from the offering that was anchored high. So it looked attractive from a value point of view. And it was quite close to the basic offering from a price perspective. So again, from a value point of view, suddenly this looks stacked with value. And he just played with the price of this middle option and drew up the lower option as well, the basic option. So for example, it might be when he started £10,000 basic, 15,000, and maybe 100,000. And by the time he'd finished, maybe, I don't actually know what that initial option was, but I'd imagine it was something like, say, 40,000, 60,000, and 150,000. And you can see, depending on the ingredients of each of those options, how you can make that middle option look incredibly attractive. So it's all around positioning.
I love that example. And again, because I think we'll spend some time here, Peter, to get really deep for our audience, I'm inferring that you would recommend that middle option is the one you should aim to be the one that your buyers take. And also then with those pricing differences, do you have any rules of thumb on what the bottom to the middle to the top should be relative to each other? Or is that something that consultancies should test themselves?
I think there's definitely testing to do, because it very much depends on what are you offering in that offering that you do anchor high. But we bought some consulting recently ourselves at the Wow Company. We've engaged a company to work with us on some leadership training, and they had the 3 pricing models. And even though you know what's going on, it's still the middle one. The middle one's great value, because do we need all that stuff in the top one that's really expensive? We could get away with that, but the basic one, we're kind of missing out on this stuff. But actually, let's do this middle one, because that's the one where we get the most value. So it was all around positioning, and we're really happy with that, and really looking forward to working with them. So I guess let's say that middle option is 100,000. You would maybe position the basic as 80, and maybe the top one as 250. Something like that. But that top one equally could be 500. And I've had people do that, say 80, 100, 250, and then message me and go, oh my God, they chose the top option. What am I supposed to do? Or deliver it. I assume, make sure that you can actually deliver the top option profitably. In fact, make sure that you can deliver all of the options profitably, because it's quite possible they could go for the entry option or the top option. And that's a really obvious thing to say, but just make sure you do it. But then it doesn't matter which one they choose, and they will choose based on their budget. But you certainly get an opportunity to control their decision-making process a lot more, and make your offering in the middle look way more valuable. Can you see if you take away those 2 options, the one in the middle, is that good value? Well, I'm not sure. Put 2 options either side. It helps you make a connection and work out the value.
I think great example. I'm sure everyone listening to this is going to take away and make those 3 options. And to your point, it's nice to know that it even works on you as someone who knows this, teaches it to your clients. You're already seeing that. And I do think your point's quite critical. The make sure they're all profitable, because yes, if one's 50% gross, the other's 30, you don't really want clients going for that one, do you? So we touched on it a bit earlier, and I know it's one of the next levers, and I'd love to talk through. We've talked all about how you can raise prices so you're getting more at the bottom line. We've touched a little bit on quoting projects so you're hitting gross margin. Obviously, there's that whole bit between what you charge and what you make, so the resource. And I'd love to dive into that and I guess understand what is it that makes the difference there? Because we touched on earlier that tension of, well, we're a seasoned consultancy where we only use experts versus we're a junior consultancy. And I'm sure some people are wrestling with, well, my team won't work for less than X salary. How can they be thinking about that? And how is that resource component so critical to actually hitting those gross margin numbers?
Well, it's absolutely essential. So up until now, has been a lot of theory. We talked about positioning and intention and planning and pricing. But now this is where it gets really interesting, because we're getting practical. We've actually got to deliver some work. And if we get this wrong, this is where a lot of money, a lot of profit just gently creeps and seeps out of our businesses. So this is really important we get right. So the place to start with this is with our scoping, and to make sure that we do not undersell the diagnostics. So this is our opportunity with the diagnostics to really go deep and understand exactly what the client's looking for, to potentially identify potential pitfalls within the project, and to make sure everything is properly scoped out. And even if we do that for a project of any reasonable size, I think it's almost impossible to get that 100% right. In fact, I'd say it is impossible to get that 100% right, because things change, right? The world changes. We discover things as we go along, discover things about the client, about ourselves, opportunities to do things differently. And it's important that we have the flexibility to be able to react to those. So I think complete rigidity in scoping is going to create challenges. There's a couple of really clever things that you can do to help with that. So I remember chatting to a client who just got this nailed. And I said, well, how do you keep that flexibility when you're scoping and ensure that things don't, you manage things when they go out of scope? And he said, look, just have the scope creep conversation up front. I say to clients, look, how do you want us to handle things if things start to go out of scope, or if it looks like things are going out of scope? Because no client says, well, I want you to work for free. I want you to work overtime and I want you to work for free. No one says that at the outset. But if we are trying to have that conversation close to a deadline and everyone's stressed, you might just end up doing the work and just thinking, let's just get it done. But if you can have the conversation at the outset, you will come up with a range of options. And those range of options are things like, well, let's have a contingency budget. So I see a lot of consultancies adding 20% onto the fee and saying, look, can you just get approval for this extra 20%? And that's our contingency budget that we can draw down if necessary. And then they work out what the sign-off procedure is for that, so that there are rules in place to ensure that that's used appropriately. So contingency budgets is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to have an agile approach to projects and say, look, we're not going to scope the full £200,000 bit of work, but we're just going to do this first piece. And it's going to be £25,000 or £50,000. And that gives you an opportunity that if things do go outside of scope, your, I guess, liability from a profitability point of view is limited to just that stage of the project. So contingency budget's really sensible. An agile approach, just price based on each section as you go along and based on what you learn about the client. That's another way of doing it. But I think it's important that we just recognize that the fluidity of projects, right? And just embrace that.
I love the contingency piece. I also guess to what you said around Martin, your client, if you can front load some of that cost and that margin, you have more to play with at the back end. So if you're making 70% in the discovery, you're more open to not below 50, but less in the back end.
It gives you options, right? But I think it's having that conversation up front allows you to then further down the line say, look, this has cropped up. 2 months ago when we had the conversation, this was the process. So are you happy for us to do this extra work? This is the price attached to it. This is the benefit that we perceive. Do you want us to do it? And that's far better than just doing that work for free, because no one wins when you do work for free. No one wins, because your team are going to work harder and going to be more stressed. And that puts pressure on the wider team, not just the people who are doing the work. And crucially, the client doesn't value it. If you're doing work for free, the client doesn't often know you're doing it work for free. There's no price tag attached to it. And if there's no price tag, there's no value in the heads associated with it. So please don't do work for free. Have the conversation up front and make sure you quote for that extra work.
I think a good public service warning there, Peter. And something that just struck me, and again, we've touched on quoting, we've touched on margin. Obviously, these terms have a meaning, and that meaning can sometimes be different to people. Something we haven't touched on is when we're talking about the resource that makes up a 50% gross margin. You're talking about quoting for projects. Is that what consultancies need to hit? It's 50% on sold work, or do they need to be baking in if they have, I don't know, someone who runs operations or recruitment? Where does other staff fit into this? Because I'm imagining someone listening might have 2 or 3 people in the inverted commas back office. Are we talking 50% above, before them or after them? Because again, I don't know how much this comes up in your world.
So if you have people, so genuinely operational people like your HR, your finance, recruitment, these are people that would come out of overheads. And typically we're looking, typical overheads for consultancies would be around about 30%. So your 50% gross margin, take off your 30% equals your 20%. They're actually running lower than that at the moment. So that traditional figure of 30% is lower for consultancies. And if you have a look at this year's BenchPress report, you'll be able to see exactly what that figure is. When it comes to some consultants that do maybe work that isn't chargeable, that's where you might need a spreadsheet. That's you need to work out how much time is you want them to be utilized versus doing other things. So some of the other things that they might be doing beyond client work, things like managing the team, potentially new business activities, potentially innovation, product innovation. So you need to think about how much time do you want each individual to be spent doing client work and how much on other things. And I think setting budgets for those non-chargeable pieces of work is really, really important. So certainly for your juniors, you want them to be utilized as much as possible. As you go through the ranks, that might change. And certainly when you get to partner, the partner utilization, what we've discovered is what's really important is that partner utilization is low, because that is going to free your partners up to work on the business rather than in it and really drive the next phase of growth. So utilization is nuanced, but certainly in very simple terms for the junior roles, utilize as much as possible. Once you get up to partner, then you want them to be working on the businesses as much as possible rather than in it. And we have stats on this as well. And I can tell you that utilization rates have actually fallen in recent years. And it's an area that will cost consultancies when it comes to profitability, because if your team are not doing chargeable work, then you're still carrying that cost, but you're not getting the revenue in return. And that's going to be a real problem.
If you are listening to this because you want to improve your consultancy or your practice area or just your career, then I want to give you something that will help you supercharge that on top of this, focused on marketing. If you go to our website, createengage.co.uk/insights, you can download our super detailed ROI-driven strategy framework ebook. In that, we go into detail on exactly what you need to do to build an effective marketing strategy, to build a strategy that will deliver you ROI and help you achieve your growth goals. So take that link, download it, and enjoy that after the end of this episode. We may come to those stats. I do want to come to the point you mentioned around that 30% is going down, but just because you touched on it there, if I'm running a consultancy, you're saying I should be less chargeable, not more. And then if I'm looking at this 50% margin, where does my time come out? So I'm a partner. Does half of my time go into that number above gross margin, half below? How could I account for that so I'm not over or underestimating my gross margin?
So that will depend on how much time you want to spend doing client work. And it might be different for different partners within the business. So I know some consulting firms where they have, let's say four partners, and two of them, you just don't want them anywhere near the business. In fact, they don't want to be anywhere near the business. They just want to be doing client work, and you get them utilized as much as possible. However, there might be a couple of other partners that their time is way more valuable being spent working on the business. So looking at their strategy, innovating their service offering, potentially managing the team, driving the business forward. And so they would spend less time doing client work. So it's all about, comes back to it before, it's intent, right? How much time do you want to be spent doing client work? And then that portion of your salary is put in above the line, put as part of that cost of sale. So, and you can do this for all staff within your business. How much time do you want them to be spending doing client work? That portion of their salary goes above the line and it counts as a cost of sale, counts as part of that gross margin calculation.
And then to the 30%, you mentioned it's gone down for consultancies. And obviously we want to be increasing prices so there's more pie to cut from. But for anyone who's thinking, well, I might be hitting that gross margin. I might have the 50% gross margin, Peter, but I'm only hitting, 5 or 10% net margin. What are those things they should be looking at in there? What are the best consultancies doing in terms of reducing that spend in the middle, while also, I guess, staying so that it's a viable business, to your point of being sold? There's actual business things they need, recruitment, etc.
I would be very surprised if any consultancies listening to this were bloated when it came to their overheads. In fact, I've got the stats on this.
Okay.
So this is the place often consultancies go looking first, and I think it's the wrong place to look. They go looking at their overheads. We need to save money. We need to improve profitability. It almost feels like penny pinching, where in actual fact, the real game to play is in our margin. Because going back to the start of the conversation, only 37% of consultancies are hitting that 50% gross margin. That's the opportunity that we all have. Go looking there, because every single day you are paying consultants and you are paying them to not do enough chargeable work and not doing it at the right rates. So that is the place that you should go looking. Let's have more consultancies hitting that 50%, and that will flow to operating profit. Now, have a cursory look in operating profit, right? Just to check you're not doing anything wild in there. But combing through that, you're looking in the wrong place. And I know that because I can see that the averages for overheads are below the traditional averages of that 30%.
I think it's a great piece of advice, and actually brings us on to the next lever. And this is one I'm going to be taking as many notes for as our listeners, which is that reporting. Is what do you even report on to know where to look? To your point, what should I be tracking as a consultant to help me improve profitability?
So there's three types of levers. Before we get into the detail of exactly what they might be in terms of measurements, there are three types of metrics that it's really important that we have on our dashboard. So first of all, it's important to identify the lagging indicators. So these are history lessons. They tell you what's already happened. Things like, well, your year-end accounts, or even your management accounts tell you the profitability that you got last year or last month. It's a history lesson. Then we've got real-time indicators, and these are really important because they tell you what's happening right now. So measuring your project profitability in real time, weekly, is a real-time indicator. It gives you the opportunity to react in real time and adjust things so that you don't get to the end of the project and then suddenly realize that you've not made any money. So they're really important. So we've got lagging, we've got real time, and finally, we've got predictive metrics. And the predictive metrics tell you what's going to happen in the future. So for example, the number of sales conversations that you've had this week, the number of proposals that you've issued, well, those things are going to tell you the projects you're going to win further down the line, and therefore the profitability you're going to have even further down the line. So they're like a set of binoculars that will help you look into the future. And it's important that you have all three types of metrics on your dashboard and you understand the relationship between them all. Because just looking at the lagging ones, which is what a lot of businesses do, unfortunately, they're looking in the rearview mirror. And if they're not careful, they're going to crash.
What is the relationship between them? And why does that matter?
Well, quite simply, if you follow it through, let's take the predictive measures. So I love, often called leading indicators. I love a leading indicator. And I like going as early as possible in the process. So I thought about what is the most powerful leading indicator within a business, particularly when it comes to sales. My initial thought went to your weighted pipeline value, which is where you look at all the proposals outstanding, assign a percentage likelihood to them, times that by the value of the proposal, and that gives you a weighted pipeline. And that is definitely a really good predictive measure. But I wanted to go even further back. And I went right to the top of the tree and looked at number of new sales qualified leads or marketing qualified leads. And I rejected that as the key leading indicator because I wanted something that forced us to take action, that we could impact every single day. And what I landed on was number of sales conversation, number of booked sales calls or booked meetings, because that is something that you can impact every moment of every day. You can find one of those qualified leads and find a way to have a conversation. And from those, if you don't have conversations, you're never going to issue proposals. So a lot of people will look at proposals as a leading indicator. I'd go one step back and have those conversations. And if you're getting into a rhythm, by the way, looking at them weekly, monthly's too late. Every single week, get in the discipline of measuring across the business, how many sales conversations are we having, booked calls, booked meetings, both with prospects and with our existing clients. If you do that and set targets for that every single week and task all the key people within your team of hitting those metrics, I promise you, you'll have a transformational year. And you will watch that feed through. You'll watch every other stat bounce off that one. More proposals and more clients and more projects and more profitability. So it all flows through. And I've seen businesses. So there was one consulting firm that measured this religiously. And then two partners, one got married, one had a baby. And for that 6-week period, not a lot happened in terms of the book sales calls. But the business was doing just fine. And the following month it was doing just fine. And the following month it was doing just fine. It was month 4 that they actually saw the impact of that. And suddenly things dropped off a cliff and they could relate it all back to that rather lovely and interesting period in anyone's life where you get married and have kids, but nevertheless, you may not be focused quite so much on work. And they made a pact that they were, never going to do that again. So they just focused on that number because they knew the impact it would have 3 or 4 months down the line.
It's a great example and also brings to life how those metrics stop the feast and famine you see in a lot of consultancies. To your point, the work drops off and so they're frantically having sales calls. And just because I know it will be interesting to our audience, I love you don't look at the leads, you look at the sales calls. I guess there's then, and this is really nuanced, but it may have happened for yourselves or that firm. What do you track? And what I mean is what qualifies as a sales conversation? Because the sales process in consulting is hugely long. We might have 10 meetings. Is it meeting 1? Is it every meeting? Is it our first coffee? What do you track?
It's the new one. It's got to be new. It's that first coffee, because otherwise you're just kind of kidding yourself and tricking the stats, just, counting the same thing 10 times. Because if nothing's going to happen, you won't have the second coffee or the third or the fourth. So it's got to be new conversations. And it's that discipline, it's that rigor that will see you having a really full pipeline and a tremendous year further down the line.
I love that because like you say, actually the behavior drives off. If there's business to be done, we'll keep talking. If there's not, there's not. Are there any other predictive metrics that you have found as powerful in either just consulting growth as a whole or specific functions? I think we're going to build a scorecard here, Peter, I'm sure. Is that the main predictive metric, or are there others you see as really key?
Oh, look, there are lots. I've done a whole presentation on this. So from a people metric, I'm a huge fan of EMPS, so employee NPS. It's similar to NPS, just to clarify, Net Promoter Score. But what I love about it is it's, in fact, both those metrics, Net Promoter Score and Employee Net Promoter Score, is the predictive nature of them. They tell you about what's going to happen in the future. They tell you about your client retention, and they tell you about your employee retention, and they tell you about whether you're going to have challenges with either of those further down the line. So NPS, Net Promoter Score, and Employee NPS are two wonderful predictive measures that will help you figure out client retention and spend, and employee retention and satisfaction and engagement further down the line. So I love those two as early indicators. I've also got some amazing lagging indicators when it comes to profitability that are absolutely crucial. So I'm going to chuck them in the mix.
Go for it.
So when it comes to profitability, our jobs as leaders of our business is to figure out where we make money and where we lose money. And I mean, figure that out empirically. So to do that, we need to measure profit in more detail than ever before. We need to measure it by client. We need to measure it by project. We need to measure it by service offering. We need to measure it by sector, and potentially even by individual within our team. So we understand at every single level within our business where we're making money and where we're losing money. Now, once you have that information, you have a huge advantage over the rest. So I've got the stats. Not enough consultancies are doing this. Not enough are going into this detail. But those that do are way more likely to hit those big numbers when it comes to profitability. Because once you see something, you can't unsee it. And you'll be compelled to take action. So you'll be compelled to take action with the clients that you're not making money with. You'll focus disproportionately on your most profitable services and sectors and sell more of those services to those sectors. And you will just shift in your focus towards the more profitable elements of your business, and the least profitable bits will drop away. Now, if you don't have that information, you're flying blind, and that's not a great place to be.
How do you get that information, and how do you strike the balance between having the detail and it becoming a cottage industry? Because again, consultants, we're very good on spreadsheets, and it can sometimes seem like you go into so much detail before you know it, you've created a whole new business area internally. How do you recommend people strike that balance, and what can someone do if they want to do that analysis? What's the best way to do it effectively?
So you need technology. So the typical journey a consultant will go on is from having no tech to some spreadsheets to maybe disparate systems, so maybe a time tracking system or a CRM system. But the ultimate place to end up is with one system, one PSA, so a professional services automation system. And when you have that, then you're one click away. And that's the power of this tech. It costs more money, and there's some work to do to set it up. But my goodness, the benefit of that investment in time and money, you get back several times repeatedly, because what you can then do is just click a button and you get the information that you want. Now, having the information is one thing. It's then what you do with it is another. So a really good example of a consulting firm that had made that investment, that had that reporting capability. But what they did was, with their weekly project reporting, they sent the reports round as an email to all of their client directors, all of their project leads, and nothing happened. And they were really rather annoyed by that. And so they came to me and said, well, look, nothing's happening. And I said, well, tell you what, why don't you just call a meeting for 1 hour on a Monday, where instead of emailing them out, you go through those numbers together. You bring those same people into a room and you start talking about project profitability, live, weekly reporting. And that was transformational for them, because suddenly no one wanted to be bottom of the league table. There was visibility and there was accountability. And yeah, you just felt that feeling in your stomach, oh, crikey, I need to do better here. But it also fostered best practice and learning from each other. Well, why is it that this person over here consistently is getting better performance on projects? What is it that they're doing? What can we learn from them? So they fostered best practice. They fostered a bit of friendly competitiveness, but it was that visibility and accountability that changed things for them. So yes, you need the tech. Yes, you need to look at those reports, but you also need to then bring people together and decide what action you're going to take. Otherwise, it's a waste of time.
I love that example. And I do want to come on to that in a moment, because I think there's a fascinating question around how you build a profit-focused culture and how you avoid some of the pitfalls that people might perceive coming with that. Before we do, because we've touched on predictive, we've touched on lagging, and I think you were talking there about an example of real time. Just to make sure I've not skirted over it, I'd love to just go into what are some of those real time metrics, because, and I'll say it because someone listening might think, if I know I've got Bill on a project and his day rate's X, his salary's Y, what actual real time metrics am I tracking beyond knowing he's going to work for 5 days?
Well, I think in that example, if you're just selling days, then tracking the profitability, or the importance of tracking the profitability, reduces. But there's other things that you could track Bill on. So for example, what other conversations is he having? So if he's going into the client every single day, is he seeking out opportunities? Now, it might not be a daily or a weekly metric, but if every month or every quarter, is he seeking out opportunities within the business? So when this contract ends, that we've got the next gig lined up, we're having conversations with other areas of the business. So you could certainly track Bill, lovely Bill, on that one. I guess the real time metrics really come into their own is if you have a fixed pricing policy. So if you're looking at a project and saying, we will deliver this work for this price. And in the background, you figured out the days, but the client is not buying the days, they're buying the output, the end result. And that's when it's really important to track, are we delivering according to the plan? Or is this taking longer than expected? And if it is, what are we going to do about it? You would want to know that in the project, not at the end.
I think, to your point, a great example where Bill is on a fixed price, that makes a lot of sense. And Bill has done us well today as well. Thank you, Bill. I wanted to touch that just so I had clarity, and thank you, Peter, because I think that's got a really great picture of those predictive, those lagging, and those real time. And actually, to the cultural point you mentioned, and I think it'd be fascinating to spend some time here, because again, I know it's one of those big levers, and one that I think in consultancy, there's probably a lot of sensitivity around, because a lot of consultants go into consulting to consult. We've all heard I'm not a salesman, I'm a consultant. And particularly for founders, partners, owners listening to this, I suspect one of the concerns is all of this, Peter, sounds great, but as soon as I start doing it with my team, they're going to think, it's changing, I've got to be a salesperson, etc. And maybe the example you gave a moment ago is a good place to start. You can tell me, but how do you advise people, or how do you see the best consultancy shifting that culture to be profit focused? And how do they avoid what people perceive as those risks of, we're selling out, as it were?
So I'm going to share a case study from a client at Wows that I think just does this brilliantly well. And there are a number of components that have helped them build profitability into their culture. And the first one is education. So they spend a lot of time helping the team understand the importance of profitability, because profit can be a bit of a dirty word, whereas actually profit is the center of all the good things that you want to achieve as a business. So quite frankly, whatever cause you're championing, or whatever mission that you are on as a business, you will not get very far without profit. When it comes to individuals and their career progression, the more profit there is, the faster the business is growing, the more opportunities there are for them to progress and grow into their roles, the more opportunities there are for pay rises and bonuses. So everyone benefits when there is more profit. So there's an education piece going on. What they also did alongside that was they aligned rewards to the results that business got, and they anchored them all around profitability. So they were very, very clear. Profit's a good thing, and you will directly benefit when we make more of it. So they were really clear about the rewards. And in fact, what we've seen in this year's BenchPress is all consultancy firms generally that align rewards with results perform better. The next bit of the jigsaw was complete transparency and visibility of those key metrics. So every single month, they published management accounts that included not just their gross profit, but also the operating profit. So the entire team could understand and see how they were performing, knowing that at the end of the year, they were going to get a slice of that operating profit. It was all clear and transparent. We're all in this together. We all want the same things. Now, what that did was it drove the behavior that they wanted, because it was a team prize, people worked together as a team. And I love the idea of having one team to avoid these silos and, mini fiefdoms. It's just unnecessary. By having one team approach, one pot of profit that was shared, it created a culture where everyone wanted to help out. Everyone understood how they could make a difference on a simple level on the projects that they were working on and delivering them efficiently and profitably, but also in terms of generating new work and having new conversations. Even if they weren't capable of having those conversations themselves, they knew that if they could identify an opportunity and pass it to someone else, everyone would benefit. So suddenly everyone is all aligned and focused. And when you get people aligned and focused on a common goal, that's when the magic happens. And if you can get them aligned and focused on profitability, guess what? You'll make more money. It's that simple.
It's a great case study. And it's a really specific point, but I'm sure others will be thinking about it. So that example there, they've been very transparent. They've culturally explained, if we make more money, you will be able to do more, be more, see more. Actually, then that point around, well, the part of the operating profit that goes to the team, is there any either data from the BenchPress or from your clients or rules of thumb around how you create that right balance of incentive versus, in effect, profit erosion? Because, if I've got an operating margin of 20% and I'm giving 5% to the team, well, really, I've got an operating margin of 15%. So it has quite a material impact. How have you seen that done well to make the team, be part of that journey while keeping the business to the numbers that, it should be?
So we've actually got some interesting data on that we're publishing in the summer around the level of bonuses that consultancies pay. But what I can tell you in terms of generalist advice is now's a really good time to be devising your bonus scheme, because you do not want to be devising bonus schemes in the good times, because you want to experience the challenges of running a business as they are right now and build the structure around those, knowing that if it works then, it will definitely work when the good times roll. And they will come. We just don't know when. So devising a bonus scheme now is a really, really good thing. But stress test it. Say, well, what would happen if this happened? And how would we deal with that? So I think it's those what if scenarios, but it all comes down to education and helping the team understand that we're all in this together. And I guess picking a number that's right for you, sitting down with your accountant and going, well, what does this mean on the bottom line? And how will this impact us in 2-3 years down the line if we continue to pay this bonus scheme? The other way of doing it, of course, if you're unsure, and a lot of people will be listening to this, or perhaps tentative, is to say, well, look, we're trialing that this year. We are trialing something for this year, because then you're not committing to it forever. It's not contractual. You say, look, this year we're running a discretionary bonus scheme that looks like this, and let's see how we get on. And I think that's another really smart way of dipping your toe in the water, seeing what it does to behaviors, because that's what we're trying to change here is behavior. Does it get you the behaviors that you want? I know consultancy firms that have implemented schemes with really good intentions, and it's really not gone very well, but they've learned from that process. They've been able to backtrack because it was just an experiment. So how could you experiment with your bonus scheme this year?
So we've talked a lot, Peter, around how you can drive profitability. And a lot of it is talked towards new customers. We touched on a bit around fee increases for current customers and obviously, or clients, sorry, that's one way to do it. I know that this is another key lever, and a bit to your point of people focus on what's above the line, not below. I guess in this instance, people talk a lot about how do we improve our offer, our pricing for new clients. What are they missing with current clients? Where is that potential profit that just goes untapped in those great relationships people have already worked hard to build?
There's just opportunities, gold right underneath our noses. And there are some very specific things that a lot of consultancies could do better at that will help them, I guess, tap into those opportunities and dig up that gold. And I talked about it earlier. The fact that only 30% are having regular reviews with clients is criminal. It's just such a missed opportunity to get in front of clients and to explore what happens next, where we go with this. So those regular reviews are crucial. But I think there's a higher level decision to make. So around ownership. So who actually is responsible overall for generating revenue from your existing clients? And what targets are you setting them? Again, going back to the leading, lagging and real time, are you setting sufficient leading indicators for that person? So every single month, things like number of new conversations or introductions to different parts of the business? Are you holding them accountable to that? Because that accountability, that ownership and targets and accountability is crucial for this. And thinking about who within your business needs to have those things above their head. And then it's getting into the detail. It's actually some practical things that will make a difference. Things like grading clients. So I know we all love our clients, but they're not all the same and we shouldn't treat them the same. So we should identify the clients that are highly profitable for us, that have a high propensity to deliver us follow-up work, and also are likely to refer us to other areas of the business, or potentially even other, or a flagship to allow us to pick up work within their industry. So identifying those grade one clients and spending more time with them, and then figuring out who are the least profitable clients with lower propensities to spend. Well, we should spend less time with them, and actually being, again, intentional and setting rules around how much time we spend with each of them. Because what tends to happen is sometimes the small ones are a bit noisy and a bit grumbly, and they're the ones that sap our attention, when actually we need to be spending time up here on the most profitable clients. So grading our clients makes a difference. And then letting them know everything that we do. So pitching to them, constantly going to them and saying, look, here are 4 or 5 things we've done for other people that we haven't done for you yet. Do any of these float your boat? Do you think that we can make a difference in these departments? Or even better, actually say, look, we've been thinking about your business and we think we can make a huge impact over here by doing this type of work. We'd love to pitch that to you. Can we have an opportunity to pitch that to you? So being proactive, being on the front foot, getting in front of people, and then having a plan. It's kind of obvious really, but it all comes back to having a plan and being accountable to that plan, accountable to those leading indicators. If you do that for your existing clients, you will have a terrific year, and opportunities will just crop up.
I love that point you made around actually taking your other offerings to clients. And I think I'd love to understand where you've seen that done well, or what you recommend to clients. Because again, we touched on earlier, consultants often can be a bit averse if they feel like they're being salesy. It's something we try and avoid as consultants. How do you help people see that as a profit driver and not a salesy activity, taking out, here's the other 4 things we could do for you, Peter?
I don't think it's about sales at all. It's about impact. And we talk about this in our own business at WOW. So I have a bunch of accountants. If you think consultants
are bad, accountants are worse.
Well, consultants, that's not what you're trained to do. You're trained to serve and deliver. But actually, what you're really trained to do is create an impact for clients. And that's what drives our team every single day. They love making an impact for clients. And I know that's what drives a lot of people here. You love that feeling that you've made a difference. Well, guess what? If you don't sell projects, there'll be no project for you to make a difference. So every time you have a conversation with a client, it's about helping them solve a challenge. Same for us, same for you, same for everyone listening to this. We're helping them solve a challenge. And if we help them solve a challenge, then that makes a big difference in their world. And it's right that we put a price tag on it. So every time we have a conversation, every time we pitch a bit of work, every time we actually sell a piece of work, that is an opportunity to make a difference, to make an impact, to help someone on their journey. And that is what we all get out of bed to do, is those moments where we transform something. We change someone's lives, we change a company, and we change the world. And that's what gets us out of bed. But you can't change anything unless you actually sell it in the first place. So if you want to make a difference, you've got to sell first.
I love that. And I also don't know why this late in the show, it's triggered to me that, to your point, you have as a team of people who are more adverse, or I don't want to judge them, but typically more adverse to selling. Accountants are typically considered more adverse to selling and pitching than consultants. I love what you explained there around the impact of it. Really detailed. How did you train people to do this? Because you mentioned you've got a team of 50 plus. How did you actually train people to be able to have those conversations? Or what training does a consultancy need to put in place to enable someone to go and pitch? Because if you're not natural at it, it can feel quite uncomfortable.
So I think first up, it's helping them spot the opportunities. And I guess what really helps with that is frameworks and scripts. So keeping it really simple, giving your team little scripts that they can use to help identify additional opportunities. And then that builds confidence. And there's ways that you can further build confidence by modeling best practice and bringing people together to to talk about how they get on and to help them realize by trialing it and setting mini challenges, it's not as scary as you imagine. Because a lot of consultants and accountants will have this fear of, oh my goodness, if I ask this question, then they're going to shout at me. They don't. It's just an exploratory conversation. And it's really comes down to understanding. The more you understand about your client and that you've documented it, the better able you are to spot opportunities. So a really good metric to measure is the number of relationships that your team have with the number of people at a client. So if you have a one-to-one relationship, just one of you within your business and one person on the client side, well, that's hugely risky and you're not going to uncover loads, or you're unlikely to cover loads of opportunities. As soon as you have multiple relationships, both on your side and on the client side, well, then that's a lot stronger because there's a lot more links between you and a lot more conversations happening. And through those conversations and through that understanding, you will find opportunities. So scripts will definitely help. Targets help, some accountability, bringing in some friendly competition. But actually, crucially, comes back to the education piece. This is part of their jobs, right? If you want to be a successful consultant, then at this firm, this is what we expect of you. This is what performance looks like. It's about doing the work, but it's also about finding opportunities. And I think it's just setting that expectation differently. This is what performance looks like. This is what we expect from you. And you'll be supported by your peers in achieving it.
Well, Peter, we have covered a ton in this. We've gone through all 7 profit levers. There is a lot in there for our listeners to take away. And I'm conscious this is a busy day for you as well. So I want to bring us towards the quickfire questions. There's a couple in here I ask every guest. I want to get some key takeaways from you, and then we will let you go free to increase profitability in your business and for our listeners to do the same. The first question is books. I love reading. I love hearing what my guests read. And it's, what is the book or books that's had the most impact on you or you've gifted the most, and why is that?
So one of my favorite times at WOW is the early days. So the energy and the excitement and the fear of those early days of starting a business. Because like a lot of people listening to this, we started from nothing. Paul and I, when we set up the business 21 years ago, had nothing. And a book that I was given a long, long time ago, or at that time, was the book of Yo by Simon Woodruff. So Simon is the founder of Yo Sushi, went on to found Yo Tales. And it's a wonderful book that is entrepreneurialism in a bottle. And it is the essence of those early days, the excitement, the innovation, the drive, the determination. And there's just a few mantras in there that really helped me through those early days that I occasionally just dip in again because it's good to be reminded of. But they also remind me about the excitement and energy of those early days in business. And I think anything that helps us get back that excitement and energy and reconnect to our purpose, I think will really help us whatever stage we're at in our business. So that's one of the ways I do it.
I love it. Well, and you're the first person ever 150 plus episodes in to recommend the book of Yo. So that will be the one I go and find after this. I love a bit of sushi as well. So goes well together. And then the final question, and I always like to leave my listeners with one piece of advice. And given everything we've talked about, I'm going to make it much more profit focused. What is, if someone was listening to this, they want to do one thing. What is the thing that they can take from this to make their business more profitable straight away?
So we've talked about a lot. And what I'd encourage people to do is, or hopefully there will be an area that is just they're drawn to, that they think will make the biggest difference. And I'd encourage them to go to that area, create a plan, a really succinct plan, and think about the next 90 days and how they can really build momentum in the next 90 days. So pick one area, figure out where you want to be with it in 90 days, and then go and speak to your team about how they can get involved in executing that plan. And I'd love to hear, to anyone listening, what you've chosen, what your targets are for 90 days, and what you end up achieving. Because I promise you, if you create those plans, those little 90-day bursts, you will achieve great things. And once you get the buzz for it and the habit for it, you'll go on to the next thing and the next thing. Because here's the thing, this is a never-ending journey. Right? I've been talking about this for 2 decades now, running my own business for the same amount of time. There's still stuff for me to do, and there always will be. So pick the thing that will make the biggest difference, focus on it over the next 90 days, and then have a rest and go again.
I love that. Well, I'm going to take a lot of this away to make my own 90-day plan as well. And to your offer there, for anyone who does want to send you their plan, wants to find out more about WOW, wants to find out more about Consultancy Growth Network, where would you point them to? Where can they get in touch and find out more?
So find me on LinkedIn. There's not many people with my surname, CZAPP. So look me up, Peter Czapp, and drop me a message. I'd love to chat.
Amazing. Well, we'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes, so anyone who's listening can go to our website, go to the show notes, they'll find you there. And likewise, I'm excited to hear how people take what you've shared and run with it. Thank you. This has been brilliant. And all that's left to say is I've really enjoyed this, and all the best for the rest of your week, Peter.
Fab. Thanks, Nick.
Cheers. Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the specialist digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Now, for long-time listeners, you will probably already know who we are. You may have even heard one of our ads on a previous episode of this podcast. But for those of you who don't, here is a short introduction. At Create Engage, we help you create an effective marketing strategy for your consultancy, a strategy that will resonate with your target clients. And then we support you by delivering the campaigns you need to turn that strategy into a reality, helping you to build your brand, raise your profile with your prospective clients, and ultimately generate return on investment from your marketing activity. Now, I could tell you about many of the great clients that we work with and the results we've delivered for them. But instead, I'm going to do something much more powerful and something that I would recommend you do for your own marketing. I'm going to let our clients do the talking for us. If you are currently thinking about marketing for your consultancy, you're going to want to listen to this.
Create Engage started the process for us. They managed it end to end. They came up with some really creative ideas, and we were really happy with the work that they did, which meant that we could just focus on running the business. Not only did we start conversations with clients that we hadn't spoken to before, but also there was tangible return on investment by some work that we were given.
They've helped right from the initial shaping of the idea through to helping us work out what our end goal was. They've supported us with the visual identity and our positioning of the brand.
We've had an immediate expansion of our network and have initiated a raft of new conversations with owners, CEOs in target client organisations, and has led to us winning new projects already.
One of the greatest compliments, I guess, is that one of our competitors even said that they really like what we're doing with marketing and they wish they could be doing something as good.
So from our perspective, we couldn't recommend Create Engage any more than this.
I would certainly recommend Create Engage if you're a consulting firm. They really understand consultancies and the sort of challenges we face. And I don't think you're going to get much better marketing anywhere else.
So I wouldn't hesitate to recommend Create Engage. They did a really good job for us.
So if you're looking for an agency that can help you achieve the results that our clients just described, then head to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can find out more about how we support consulting firms like you. You can download our latest ebook and you can get in touch to talk about how we can help you take your consultancy to the next level through digital marketing. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.